In the early days of January 1942, a long, dark vessel, the U-123, cut through the frigid waves of the North Atlantic. This German submarine was heading toward the east coast of the United States on a mission that would change the nature of naval warfare. At that point in history, the United States had only just entered the global conflict, and its coastal waters were still peaceful and unprotected. The crew of the U-123 sailed westward toward a coastline completely unprepared for their arrival. While the cities of New York and New Jersey were still brightly lit, the submarine waited in the darkness just offshore. The mission was simple, yet perilous. Find large cargo ships carrying essential supplies and intercept them before they could cross the ocean to Europe. The level of danger was immense for the people on land and the sailors at sea. Thousands of tons of fuel and food are transported along these routes every day. And now, a silent predator is watching from beneath the surface. The U.S. military has very few warships or aircraft ready to defend these waters, leaving these busy shipping lanes vulnerable to attack. As the lights of the American coast appeared on the horizon, those inside the U-123 submarine prepared for a confrontation that would soon become headline news around the world. The presence of this vessel marks a major turning point in the global conflict. To better understand this mission, we first need to explore the historical context in which the vessel was built. The U-123 submarine was built at a time when the German Navy wanted to attack targets far from their base ports. In the late 1930s, naval planners realized they needed a larger submarine capable of carrying more fuel and operating at sea for months at a time. This led to the creation of the Type IXB class submarines. The U-123 was ordered in late 1937 and completed at a shipyard in Bremen. When the submarine officially entered service in May 1940, the war in Europe was raging. Germany had just invaded France, and the Battle of the Atlantic had become the most important front of the war. Physically, the U-123 was a colossal engineering feat. It was approximately 250 feet, about 73 meters long, nearly the length of a football field. Designed for long voyages, it was considerably larger than standard submarines used near European coasts. This greater size allowed it to carry over 150 tons of fuel. This meant the vessel could travel over 10,000 miles without stopping for refueling. For the crew, this meant they could reach the U.S. coast, fight for several weeks, and still have enough energy to return to Europe. Inside its steel hull, the vessel used two different power systems. When on the surface, it ran on two large diesel engines. These engines were noisy and powerful, allowing the vessel to travel at a speed of approximately 18 knots, or about 21 miles per hour. This speed was fast enough to keep up with most cargo ships. However, when the vessel had to submerge to evade enemy aircraft or escort ships, it switched to electric propulsion. These engines are powered by enormous batteries. When underwater, the vessel moves much slower, only about 8 miles per hour. It also cannot stay underwater indefinitely, as the crew needs natural air, and the batteries will eventually run out of power. The U-123's primary weapon is torpedoes. These are long, self-propelled underwater bombs capable of sinking a massive ship with a single shot. The submarine has 6 weapon launch tubes, 4 forward and 2 aft. In total, the U-123 carries 22 torpedoes. If the sea is calm and no enemy warships are nearby, the crew can also use a large deck gun located in front of the control tower. This gun allows them to sink smaller merchant ships without using up their expensive torpedoes. The design of the vessel is only half the story. Next, we meet the commander who has to operate it under pressure. The most famous person associated with the success of the U-123 submarine was Reinhard Hardegen. Before becoming a legendary submarine commander, his path to the high seas was not smooth. Hardegen actually began his military career as a pilot in the Naval Aviation Force. However, a serious plane crash left him severely injured and unable to continue flying. Instead of leaving the military, he decided to transfer to the Submarine Corps. His experience as a pilot gave him a unique perspective on distance and navigation that many of his fellow officers took advantage of. Hardegen assumed command of the U-123 submarine in May 1941, succeeding the ship's first commander, Karl-Heinz Moehle. While Moehle was a successful and disciplined leader who had built the ship's reputation in its early missions, Hardegen brought a new level of boldness to the command center. He was renowned for his composure under pressure and his ability to make quick decisions when facing enemy escorts. His crew trusted him deeply, often describing him as a commander who was both strict and fair to his subordinates. Life under Hardegen's command was harsh. He pushed the crew to their limits, but he also focused on their well-being in the cramped and foul-smelling living conditions on the submarine. He understood that a tired or discouraged crew could make a mistake that would lead to everyone's death. Hardegen was also highly respected by the senior leaders of the German Navy. They regarded him as a professional capable of handling the most difficult tasks, daring to step outside his comfort zone. He was the kind of leader willing to stand on the bridge in the freezing cold to ensure the best possible view of the target. His leadership style was shaped by a combination of courage and technical knowledge. He didn't just follow orders. He sought to exploit the enemy's weaknesses. For example, during his time in command, he became an expert in using the darkness of night and the bright lights from the shore to conceal his submarine from view. This tactical thinking made him one of the most famous commanders of the entire war. Upon leaving the ship, he received the highest military medals for his bravery and influence on the naval conflict. His command skills were a key factor in the ship's success. Now, we will follow what actually happened when he brought U-123 into the middle of battle. The U-123 submarine had a long and busy operational history during the war. Before becoming famous for its missions near the United States, it spent months fighting in the cold waters between Europe and Canada. During its early patrols, beginning in late 1940, the submarine was primarily used to attack cargo ships carrying food and military supplies to Britain. Under the command of its first commander, Karl-Heinz Moehle, the submarine proved to be a reliable and dangerous weapon. It successfully sank several large merchant ships during this time, helping the German Navy to cut off supply lines that sustained the British war effort. The most important chapter in the submarine's combat history began in early 1942. It was a mission called Operation Drumbeat. U-123 was one of the first 5 submarines sent to attack the east coast of the United States. As the submarine approached the coasts of New York and North Carolina, the crew was shocked by what they saw. American cities were still brightly lit at night, lighthouses were still functioning, and cargo ships were sailing alone without any escorts protecting them. This made the merchant ships easy targets amidst the dazzling city lights. On January 12, 1942, U-123 achieved its first success on this mission by sinking a British cargo ship called the Cyclops. Over the next few weeks, the submarine moved along the coast, sinking ship after ship. The crew worked day and night, frequently attacking on the surface where they could move faster. In just one mission, the commander and his crew sank 8 ships. This caused widespread panic in the United States, as the public realized that war had arrived right on their doorstep. The American forces were caught by surprise, which allowed U-123 to operate almost unimpeded for weeks. Throughout its career, U-123 completed 12 combat patrols. It spent over 700 days at sea, an astonishing amount of time for any submarine crew. By the end of its service, the submarine was credited with sinking 45 ships and damaging several others. This total made it one of the most successful submarines in the entire German fleet. It survived dozens of near misses when enemy aircraft dropped underwater bombs near its hull, but the vessel always managed to return to port for repairs. Many such missions proved the ship a survivor, but one particular night shaped its place in history forever. Next, we will follow what actually happened when it set sail for its most famous battle. On the night of January 14, 1942, the submarine U-123 was anchored in frigid waters just miles off the coast of Long Island, New York. The atmosphere inside was tense, but quiet. For the crew, it was a strange experience. Through the periscope of the command bridge, they could see the bright, shimmering Manhattan skyline in the distance. The United States was at war, but the city lights were still on. The absence of a blackout order made the mission much easier for the German sailors, as the lights from the shore created a bright backdrop, making any passing ship look like a shadow on the horizon. Shortly after midnight, scouts spotted a large target moving on the waves. It was the Norness, a massive oil tanker carrying thousands of barrels of oil. The ship was sailing alone and completely unaware of the submarine nearby. Hardegen ordered the submarine to move into firing position while remaining surfaced. Since there were no American patrol boats or aircraft in the area, U-123 didn't even need to take cover underwater. The commander observed through binoculars as the distance between the submarine and the tanker narrowed. At such close range, and with the submarine moving in a straight line, missing was almost impossible. Hardegen ordered the firing. A single torpedo ripped through the water and slammed into the side of the Norness. A massive explosion followed, creating a column of fire that rose into the night sky. However, the ship was too large and heavily built to sink immediately. The tanker's crew began moving quickly, lowering lifeboats into the frigid, oil-soaked water. Hardegen, wanting to complete the mission quickly before any rescue ships arrived, ordered more torpedoes fired. After 2 more successful hits, the massive oil tanker finally began to sink beneath the waves. This was the first official sinking of the mission off the American coast, and it happened within the shore's line of sight. The rest of the night was a frantic series of operations. Instead of leaving the area for safety, U-123 remained near the coast, searching for more targets. The crew was astonished that no aircraft or warships came to pursue them even after the loud explosions. They felt almost invisible in the darkness. As the sun began to rise, the submarine moved further offshore to take refuge in deeper waters. But the damage was already done. The peace on the American coast had been shattered, and news of the sinking would soon send shockwaves through military command in Washington. The success of that night had given the crew a sense of power, but it also meant the Americans would soon begin a counterattack with everything they had. That single night proved that submarines were a threat that could not be ignored. But while the vessel seemed invincible in this mission, the dynamics of the war had begun to shift. As the war continued into 1943 and 1944, the situation in the Atlantic Ocean changed drastically. The ocean was no longer a safe hunting ground for German submarines. The Americans and British had greatly improved their underwater detection systems and were flying long-distance planes that could spot a submarine from miles away. Despite the increasing danger, U-123 was one of the lucky ones. While hundreds of other boats were being destroyed, this submarine managed to survive several more missions. However, the years of constant combat and the pressure of deep diving were taking a heavy toll on its engines and hull. By mid-1944, U-123 was stationed at a massive concrete submarine base in Lorient, on the coast of France. When the Allied armies began to push across France after the Great Invasion of the continent, the German Navy realized they would soon lose their coastal bases. Many submarines were ordered to sail back to Germany, But U-123 was no longer in good enough condition to make the long journey through waters controlled by the enemy. In August 1944, as the enemy forces approached the city, the German crew received a final, difficult order. They were told to deliberately sink their own boat in the harbor to prevent it from being captured and used against them. This usually would be the end of the story for a warship, but U-123 had a very different fate. After the war ended in 1945, the French Navy decided the boat was still a valuable piece of technology. They spent months working with heavy machinery to bring the submarine back to the surface. They were successful, and after a long period of repairs and cleaning, the boat was ready to sail once again. The French officially commissioned the boat into their own navy and renamed it the Blason. Instead of being a hunter for Germany, the boat spent the next 12 years serving the France. It was used to train new sailors and participated in many naval exercises across the Mediterranean and Atlantic. The old submarine finally reached the end of its working life in 1957 when it was retired from active duty. 2 years later, it was towed to a shipyard and taken apart so the steel could be used for other purposes. Unlike many of its sister ships that remain at the bottom of the ocean today, U-123 lived a second life. The physical boat may be gone, but its impact on history is still being studied by experts around the world. Let's look at why this specific submarine is remembered so clearly today. U-123 is remembered today as more than just a successful submarine. It is a symbol of the moment the war truly became global. Its mission off the American coast proved that the Atlantic Ocean was no longer a shield that could protect the United States from the conflict in Europe. Before this boat arrived, many people in America felt the war was something happening in a far-off land. The presence of a silent hunter, just miles from New York City, changed that feeling forever. It was a psychological blow that forced the American military to realize they were vulnerable and completely unprepared for this type of underwater combat. The legacy of U-123 is most visible in how it changed the way the United States defended its own waters. Because of the damage caused by this boat, and a few others like it, the American government had to make massive changes. They finally began to use a system where merchant ships traveled in large groups protected by several escort ships. They also ordered entire cities to turn off their lights at night, so that passing ships would not be easy targets against the glow of the shore. These simple but vital changes in strategy likely saved thousands of lives and millions of tons of food and fuel in the years that followed. From a military standpoint, the boat showed the world the terrifying power of a long-range submarine. It proved that a single vessel, operating thousands of miles away from its home port, could cause economic chaos for a giant nation. By sinking oil tankers and cargo ships, U-123 had a direct impact on the daily lives of people on land, leading to fuel shortages and changes in how supplies were moved across the country. It taught naval leaders that protecting the entire coastline was just as important as winning big battles in the middle of the ocean. Historians also find the boat fascinating because it was a rare survivor. The vast majority of German submarines were destroyed at sea, often taking their entire crews with them. U-123's ability to survive 12 long patrols and then continue to serve in the French Navy after the war makes it a unique case study in naval history. It allowed engineers and sailors from other countries to study the design and technology of the boat in great detail. Its long life, stretching into the late 1950s, reminds us that the machines of war often continue to have an impact long after the fighting has stopped. The history of U-123 is a story that still captures the imagination of people today.